The snowfall had begun as Penelope clutched her 3-month-old daughter against her chest, the threadbare shawl doing little to shield either of them from the biting December wind of 1878. Behind her stood the Wyoming ranch house where, until an hour ago, she had been a wife. Now she was just another abandoned woman with nowhere to go, her belongings scattered in the dirt around her, her husband's drunken accusations still ringing in her ears. "You ain't welcome here no more," Walter had slurred, his face contorted with baseless rage. "Take that bastard child and get off my property." His final words before slamming the door, "That baby ain't mine." Penelope's tears had frozen on her cheeks as she gathered what she could carry, a small bundle of baby clothes, the silver locket her mother had given her, and the $5 she'd managed to hide away. The rest of her possessions lay strewn across the yard, some already being covered by the falling snow. Cheyenne was 15 miles east. Medicine Bow lay 20 miles west. In between was nothing but open range, a few scattered homesteads, and the certain death of a woman and infant exposed to a Wyoming winter night. She began walking anyway, following the rutted wagon trail westward. The baby, Emma, had fallen mercifully silent, lulled by the motion and wrapped in every scrap of fabric Penelope could spare. Her own fingers had gone numb, and her cotton dress offered little protection from the wind that cut across the prairie like a knife. As darkness began to fall, Penelope spotted a faint light in the distance. Hope surged within her, giving her frozen limbs new strength. A homestead, perhaps, or a line shack where she might beg shelter for the night. The snow was falling harder now, obscuring her vision. She stumbled, nearly dropping Emma, and realized with growing horror that she could no longer feel her feet. The light seemed to waver, growing dimmer, and Penelope wondered if it had been nothing more than her desperate imagination. Then she heard it, the sound of hoofbeats, muffled by snow but growing closer. She turned, squinting into the gathering darkness, and saw a lone rider approaching. For a moment, fear gripped her heart. Out here, alone and vulnerable, a strange man could mean danger. But death by cold was certain. Death by stranger was only possible. She stood in the middle of the trail, clutching Emma to her chest, and waited. The rider slowed as he approached, and Penelope could make out the silhouette of a man on horseback, his broad shoulders dusted with snow, the brim of his hat pulled low against the weather. "Madam," his voice was deep, questioning. "You shouldn't be out here." "I have nowhere else to go," Penelope replied, her voice cracking with cold and exhaustion. The man was silent for a long moment, studying her from atop his horse. Then his gaze dropped to the bundle in her arms, where Emma had begun to stir and whimper. Without another word, he swung down from his saddle. He was tall, taller than she'd realized, with a face weathered by sun and wind. His eyes, when they met hers, were the color of faded denim. "I've got a place about a mile from here," he said simply. Then he lifted her and the baby onto his horse with surprising gentleness, mounted behind them, and wrapped his heavy sheepskin coat around them both. Penelope didn't speak as they rode. She couldn't. The relief of rescue warred with the humiliation of her circumstances, and she found herself leaning back against the stranger's chest, too exhausted to maintain even the pretense of propriety. The cabin appeared out of the swirling snow like a mirage, small but solid, with golden lamplight spilling from its single window. The man dismounted first, then reached up to take Emma while Penelope slid down awkwardly, her frozen skirts hampering her movements. "Name's Isaac Montgomery," he said as he pushed open the door to reveal a sparse but tidy interior. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, and the single room was warm enough that Penelope felt the painful tingling of circulation returning to her extremities. "Penelope," she managed. "Penelope Thornton. And this is Emma." Isaac nodded but asked no questions as he busied himself adding wood to the fire. He moved with the efficient grace of a man accustomed to handling his own affairs, hanging his snow-covered coat by the door, pulling off his boots, setting a kettle to boil on the small iron stove. Penelope stood awkwardly by the door, uncertain of her place in this stranger's home. Emma began to fuss in earnest now, the warmth rousing her from her cold-induced lethargy. "Sit," Isaac said, gesturing to the only chair a rough-hewn rocker pulled close to the fire. "You need to warm up." Penelope sank gratefully into the chair, unwrapping Emma's blankets to check that her tiny fingers and toes were intact. The baby's face was red and angry, her cries growing more insistent. "She's hungry," Penelope explained, embarrassed. I need to feed her." Isaac nodded and turned his back, busying himself with something on the stove while Penelope loosened her dress to nurse Emma. The simple act of feeding her daughter brought a rush of emotions, relief that they had survived, fear of what tomorrow would bring, and shame at the circumstances that had brought her to the stranger's cabin. "There's stew," Isaac said after a while, still keeping his back turned, "and coffee once the water boils." "Thank you," Penelope whispered. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." Isaac turned then, his expression unreadable in the firelight. "No need for thanks. No decent man would leave a woman and baby out in weather like this." But they both knew that wasn't true. Her own husband had done exactly that. As if reading her thoughts, Isaac frowned. "Where were you headed?" Penelope looked down at Emma, now contentedly nursing. "I don't know," she admitted. "Medicine Bow, maybe. I thought I might find work there. That's a hard 20 miles in good weather. Impossible today." He poured coffee into 2 tin cups and set one near her elbow. "You can stay here tonight. Tomorrow, if the storm's passed, I'll take you wherever you want to go." The simple kindness of it, the coffee, the shelter, the lack of questions nearly undid her. Penelope bit her lip hard to keep from crying. "I have a pallet I can make up for you by the fire," Isaac continued. "I'll sleep in the lean-to with the horses." "No," Penelope said quickly. "I couldn't put you out of your home. The floor is fine for me." Isaac looked as though he might argue, but instead just nodded. "We'll sort it out after you've eaten." They shared a silent meal of venison stew and cornbread, with Isaac careful to keep his distance and his eyes averted when Penelope needed to tend to Emma. Despite his rough appearance, there was a gentleness to him that put her at ease, or perhaps it was simply exhaustion lowering her guard. When the meal was finished and Emma was sleeping, bundled in fresh blankets Isaac had produced from a trunk, Penelope found herself fighting to keep her eyes open. "Take the bed," Isaac said firmly, pointing to the narrow cot in the corner. "I insist." Too tired to argue, Penelope curled up on the cot with Emma beside her, while Isaac made himself a pallet on the floor near the fire. The last thing she remembered before drifting off was the quiet sound of him adding another log to the flames, and the strange sense of safety his presence provided. She woke to sunlight streaming through the cabin's single window and the smell of coffee. Isaac was already up, his back to her as he worked at the stove. Outside, the world was a blinding expanse of white, the snow having continued through the night. "Morning," Isaac said without turning. "There's coffee if you want it." Penelope sat up carefully, making sure Emma was still sleeping soundly. "Thank you for everything." Isaac nodded, finally turning to face her. In the daylight, she could see him more clearly, a man in his early 30s, perhaps, with dark hair that curled slightly where it met his collar. His face was lean and tanned, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled more often than his current serious expression would indicate. "Storm's blown over, but there's near 2 feet of snow out there," he said. "Might be a day or 2 before the trails are passable." Penelope's heart sank. She was already imposing on this stranger's hospitality, and now she would be a burden for even longer. "I'm sorry," she began, but Isaac cut her off with a shake of his head. "No need for that. You and the little one are welcome here until it's safe to travel." He hesitated, then added, "But I should tell you I've got to ride out to check my cattle. Lost a few in the last storm, and I need to make sure the rest are all right." Penelope nodded, understanding the urgency. For a rancher, cattle were livelihood. "We'll be fine here," she assured him. Isaac seemed relieved. "I won't be gone more than a few hours. There's plenty of food and wood for the fire." He paused. "If you don't mind my asking, how old is she?" 3 months, Penelope replied, looking down at Emma's sleeping face. "She was born in September." Isaac nodded, seeming to do some mental calculation. "And your husband? He know you're out here?" The question, gently asked, brought back the full humiliation of her situation. Penelope felt her cheeks flush as she struggled to find words that wouldn't make her sound like a fallen woman. "My husband is why I'm out here," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. He decided Emma wasn't his. Said there wasn't enough resemblance. The bitter laugh that escaped her held no humor. As if a 3-month-old baby is supposed to be the spitting image of her father. Isaac's expression darkened. "He put you out? In this weather? With an infant?" Penelope nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "What's his name?" Isaac asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Walter Thornton. He has a ranch east of here." Seeing the look on Isaac's face, she quickly added, "Please, don't trouble yourself over it. It's done now." Isaac said nothing for a long moment, then reached for his coat. "I'll be back before midday," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "Make yourself at home." After he'd gone, Penelope fed Emma and explored the small cabin. It was a bachelor's home, spare and functional, but surprisingly clean. A trunk at the foot of the cot held neatly folded clothes and a few books. A rifle stood in one corner, with a box of ammunition on the shelf above it. The pantry was well stocked with staples: flour, coffee, sugar, dried beans, and salt pork. On a small table by the window, she found a framed photograph, a formal portrait of a young woman in a dark dress. Her expression solemn, but her eyes kind. Beside it lay a folded piece of paper that had been read so many times the creases were beginning to tear. Penelope knew she shouldn't pry, but curiosity got the better of her. She carefully unfolded the paper to find a letter dated 3 years earlier, informing Mr. Isaac Montgomery of the passing of Miss Sarah Jenkins after a brief illness. Penelope refolded the letter and put it back exactly as she'd found it, a lump in her throat. So Isaac had known loss too. Perhaps that explained his kindness to strangers. She busied herself with tidying the already neat cabin and preparing a meal from the supplies in the pantry. By the time she heard hoofbeats outside, she had a pot of beans simmering on the stove and cornbread baking in the small oven. Isaac stamped the snow from his boots before entering. His face red from cold, but his expression lighter than when he'd left. "Cattle are fine," he reported, hanging up his coat. "Found them sheltered in a draw to the south." He sniffed the air appreciatively. "Something smells good." "I hope you don't mind," Penelope said. "I thought I should earn my keep somehow." Isaac's smile transformed his face, softening the weathered lines and warming his blue eyes. "No objections here. Been a while since I had a home-cooked meal I didn't have to cook myself." They ate together at the small table, the conversation easier now than it had been the night before. Isaac asked about Emma, admiring her tiny fingers and the wisp of blonde hair that curled at her forehead. He spoke of his ranch, modest by Wyoming standards at just over 100 head of cattle, but enough to sustain a man if he was careful and lucky with the weather. He didn't ask more about Walter, and Penelope didn't volunteer information. The shame of her situation was still too raw, too close to the surface. As dusk fell, Isaac lit the lamps and added wood to the fire. Outside, the temperature was dropping again, the cleared patches of ground already refreezing into a treacherous crust atop the deep snow. "I'm afraid the trail to Medicine Bow won't be passable for at least another day," Isaac said, watching as Penelope gently rocked Emma to sleep. "Maybe two." "I understand," Penelope said quietly, "and I appreciate your hospitality more than I can say." Isaac shifted uncomfortably. "About that, I've been thinking, what will you do in Medicine Bow? Do you know anyone there?" Penelope shook her head. "No, but it's a decent-sized town. I thought I might find work as a cook or a laundress, something to support Emma and myself until—" She trailed off, not certain what came after until. Isaac was silent for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "Winter's a hard time to be looking for work," he said finally, "and harder still with a little one to care for." "I don't have much choice," Penelope replied, trying to keep the desperation from her voice. "Actually," Isaac said slowly, "you might have a choice. I mean," he cleared his throat, "I've been thinking, I could use some help around here. The cabin needs a woman's touch, and come spring, I'll be busy with the cattle from sunup to sundown." Penelope stared at him, not sure she understood what he was proposing. "You and Emma could stay here," Isaac continued, his words coming faster now, "just until you get on your feet. You'd have a roof over your heads, food on the table, and I'd pay you a fair wage for the cooking and cleaning." The offer was so unexpected, so generous, that Penelope found herself speechless. She looked down at Emma, peacefully sleeping, and thought about the alternatives: the uncertain welcome in Medicine Bow, the struggle to find work with an infant in tow, the very real possibility of ending up worse off than she already was. "Why would you do that?" she finally asked. "You don't know anything about me." Isaac's gaze was steady. "I know enough. I know you're a good mother who'd walk through a blizzard to keep her child safe. I know you can cook a fine meal and keep a tidy house." He paused. "And I know what it's like to have your life turned upside down and find yourself alone." His eyes flickered to the photograph on the table, and Penelope understood. He had lost someone he loved, and perhaps helping her was a way of honoring that memory. "I wouldn't want to impose," she began, but Isaac shook his head. "It's not an imposition if I'm asking. And it wouldn't be forever, just until spring, or until you find something better." He offered a small smile. "I promise I'm harmless. Ask anyone in the county about Isaac Montgomery, and they'll tell you I'm the dullest man they know. Never get into fights, pay my debts, go to church when the weather allows." Despite herself, Penelope smiled back. "You don't seem dull to me." "That's because you haven't been here long enough," Isaac replied, his smile widening. "Give it time." Time. The word hung between them, filled with possibility. "All right," Penelope said finally, "until spring. And I insist on earning my keep, cooking, cleaning, mending, whatever needs doing." Isaac nodded, satisfaction and something else, relief, perhaps, crossing his face. "That's settled, then. Tomorrow, if the weather holds, we'll ride into Medicine Bow and get whatever supplies you and Emma need." That night, Penelope lay awake long after Isaac had retired to his pallet by the fire. She listened to the winter wind outside, thinking of how differently this day might have ended if Isaac hadn't found them on the trail. She thought of Walter, wondering if he regretted his actions or if he had already forgotten the wife and child he had cast aside. Most of all, she thought about the strange twist of fate that had brought her to this cabin, and the quiet, reserved man who had offered shelter without question or expectation. She didn't know what spring would bring, but for now, she and Emma were safe. For the first time since Walter had thrown them out, Penelope allowed herself to hope that the future might hold more than mere survival. Morning brought clear skies and a warming trend that began to melt the top layer of snow. After breakfast, Isaac saddled his horse and helped Penelope mount, placing Emma securely in her arms before swinging up behind them. The ride to Medicine Bow took most of the morning, with Isaac pointing out landmarks along the way: the ridge where he built a line cabin for use during roundup, the creek that ran through his property, the distant mountains that marked the western boundary of his range. Medicine Bow was little more than a wide spot in the road, a cluster of wooden buildings serving the Union Pacific Railroad that ran through it. But it boasted a general store, a small hotel, and most importantly to Penelope, a telegraph office. "I need to send a wire," she explained to Isaac as they dismounted in front of the store. "My sister in Ohio. She should know where I am." Isaac nodded. "Good idea. Family should know you're safe." He hesitated. "What about your parents?" "Both gone," Penelope replied. "Papa in 71, Mama last year." She didn't add that her mother's death was what had prompted her hasty marriage to Walter, a neighbor who had seemed kind and stable at the time, offering security to a young woman suddenly alone in the world. While Isaac saw to their shopping, Penelope composed a brief message to her sister in Cincinnati. Patricia Stop left Walter Stop staying with neighbor Isaac Montgomery near Medicine Bow. Stop Emma, and I will Stop will write soon. Stop love Penelope. She paid for the telegram with some of the money she'd brought from Walter's house, then joined Isaac at the general store. He was selecting yards of warm flannel and sturdy cotton, along with a set of baby bottles and a tin of powdered milk. "In case you need it," he explained, nodding to the baby supplies. "My sister had trouble nursing her second one. Said these saved her sanity." Penelope was touched by his thoughtfulness. "Thank you. I've been fortunate with Emma so far, but it's good to have options." The store owner, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, watched their interaction with undisguised curiosity. "New in these parts, madam?" he asked as he wrapped their purchases. "Just passing through," Isaac answered before Penelope could respond. His tone was polite but closed, discouraging further questions. The store owner, undeterred, continued. "Don't believe I've seen you with a wife and child before, Montgomery. Congratulations seem in order." Penelope felt her face flush, but Isaac's expression remained neutral. "Mrs. Thornton and her daughter are staying at my place for a spell," he said evenly. "Her husband's away on business." The lie slid easily from his lips, protecting Penelope's reputation without hesitation. She shot him a grateful look as the store owner processed this information. "Thornton? Any relation to Walter Thornton? Runs that spread east of here." Penelope stiffened, but Isaac's hand on her elbow steadied her. "Same family," he said vaguely. "Now, if you'll add a pound of coffee and some sugar to our order, we'll be on our way. Storm's coming in again, by the look of those clouds." The ride back to the cabin was silent, with Penelope lost in thought. She was grateful for Isaac's quick thinking at the store, but the encounter had reminded her of the precariousness of her position. In a small community like this, gossip traveled faster than telegraph wires. It wouldn't be long before everyone knew that Walter Thornton's wife was living under Isaac Montgomery's roof. "I've put you in an awkward position," she said finally, as the cabin came into view. "People will talk." Isaac's shrug was felt rather than seen, with her sitting in front of him on the horse. "People always talk. Doesn't mean we have to listen. But your reputation is my concern, not yours," he interrupted gently. "Besides, anyone who knows Walter Thornton knows what kind of man he is. Most folks around here will understand why you left." Penelope wasn't so sure, but she let the matter drop. For now, she would focus on establishing a routine for herself and Emma, on earning her keep as she'd promised. The next weeks fell into a comfortable pattern. Penelope took over the cooking and cleaning, mended Isaac's clothes, and even began making improvements to the cabin curtains for the window from a length of blue gingham, a braided rug from scraps of fabric, shelves built from crates to organize the pantry supplies. Isaac spent his days tending to his cattle and making repairs around the property. He was gone from dawn until dusk most days, but always returned with firewood for the stove, often bringing small gifts as well a jar of honey from a neighbor, a novel borrowed from the town's small lending library, a bright ribbon he thought might suit Emma. The baby thrived in the peaceful environment, growing plumper and more alert each day. To Penelope's surprise, Isaac showed a natural ease with the infant, often taking her when he came in from his chores, holding her against his shoulder and walking the floor when she was fussy. "You're good with her," Penelope observed one evening, as Isaac gently rocked Emma to sleep. "Have you been around children before?" Isaac nodded. "My sister has 3. I used to visit them often before." He trailed off, and Penelope knew he was thinking of Sarah, the woman in the photograph. "She was your intended?" Penelope asked softly, nodding toward the framed picture. Isaac was quiet for a long moment. "Yes, we were to be married in the spring of '76. She took sick that winter influenza. It took her in less than a week." His voice was even, but the pain in his eyes was still raw. "Afterward, I came west. Couldn't stay in Illinois with the memories." "I'm sorry," Penelope said, understanding now why he had been so willing to help a stranger. He knew how quickly life could change, how swiftly happiness could be replaced by desolation. "It was a long time ago," Isaac replied, though they both knew 3 years was nothing when it came to grief. He carefully placed the sleeping Emma in the cradle he had fashioned from a wooden crate. "What about you? How did you meet Walter?" Penelope sighed, her hands busy with the shirt she was mending. "He was my father's friend first. After Papa died, he helped Mama and me with the farm. When Mama passed last spring, he proposed." She bit her lip, remembering her relief at not having to face the world alone. "I was grateful. I thought he was kind." "And was he kind?" Isaac's voice was carefully neutral. Penelope considered the question. "At first, or at least not unkind. He was distant. More interested in his ranch than in me." She set down her sewing, suddenly tired. "It wasn't until I was expecting Emma that things changed. He started drinking more, staying away for days at a time. When he was home, he'd accuse me of improprieties." Isaac's expression darkened. There were no grounds for his accusations. It wasn't a question, but Penelope answered anyway. "None. I was never unfaithful. Emma is his child, though he refused to believe it." She swallowed hard. "The day he put us out, he'd been drinking since morning. Said Emma's eyes were the wrong color, that no child of his would have eyes so dark." "Her eyes are blue," Isaac said, glancing at the sleeping infant. "Yes, like mine." Penelope laughed bitterly. "Walter's are green." He convinced himself that proved something. Isaac was silent for a long moment, his jaw working as though he was restraining himself from speaking. Finally, he said, "Some men don't deserve the families they have. And some women make poor choices in husbands," Penelope countered, forcing a light tone. "But it's done now. Emma and I will make our own way." Isaac studied her face. "You're still wearing your wedding ring." Penelope looked down at her left hand, where the simple gold band Walter had given her still circled her finger. "I suppose I am," she said softly. "Habit, I guess. Or maybe I'm not ready to admit I failed so completely." "You didn't fail," Isaac said firmly. "He did." The conviction in his voice warmed something in Penelope's chest. She tucked the thought away to examine later, when she was alone with her thoughts. January turned to February, and still the weather made travel difficult. Penelope found herself in no hurry to leave the safety of Isaac's cabin. Her sister had replied to her telegram with a letter expressing concern, but also relief that Penelope and Emma were safe. Patricia offered her home in Cincinnati as a refuge, but Penelope found herself reluctant to consider the journey east. "Spring will be here before we know it," Isaac commented one evening, as they sat by the fire after Emma had been put to bed. "The passes should clear by April." Penelope looked up from the sock she was darning. "Are you eager to have your home back to yourself?" Isaac shook his head, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Just the opposite. I've grown used to coming home to a warm meal and good company." He hesitated. "I'll miss it when you go." The admission hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Penelope found herself unable to meet his eyes, her heart suddenly racing. "Emma will miss you too," she said finally. "She lights up when you come through the door." "Only Emma?" Isaac asked softly. Penelope set down her darning, forcing herself to look at him directly. "No," she admitted. "Not only Emma." Isaac nodded, his expression thoughtful. "There's no rush for you to decide your next steps. You can stay as long as you need to." He paused. "As long as you want to." Before Penelope could respond, a knock at the door startled them both. Visitors were rare, especially in the evening and in winter. Isaac rose to answer it, his hand instinctively checking the position of the rifle by the door before he opened it. Penelope heard a man's voice, then Isaac's terse reply. A moment later, he stepped back to admit the visitor, the telegraph operator from Medicine Bow, his coat dusted with snow. "Mrs. Thornton?" the man asked, his eyes finding Penelope. "Got a telegram for you. Marked urgent. Figured I'd bring it out myself, seeing as the weather's fixing to turn bad again." Penelope took the folded paper with trembling hands, thanking the man automatically. Isaac offered him coffee and a place by the fire to warm up before the ride back to town. But Penelope barely heard their conversation as she opened the telegram. "Walter dead, stop shot in saloon brawl, stop funeral Friday, stop come home, stop lawyer says urgent, stop William Thornton. Bad news." Isaac asked quietly, after the telegraph operator had left. Penelope handed him the telegram, watching as he read it. "Walter's dead," she said, her voice strangely calm. "His brother wants me to come back for the funeral." Isaac set the telegram down carefully. "Do you want to go?" Penelope considered the question. She had no love left for Walter, not after the way he had treated her and Emma. But there would be legal matters to settle, perhaps an inheritance for Emma if nothing else. "I should," she said finally. "For Emma's sake, if not my own." Isaac nodded, his expression unreadable. "I'll take you to Cheyenne in the morning. You can catch the eastbound train from there." They rode out at dawn, with Emma bundled against the cold and Penelope's few possessions packed in Isaac's saddlebags. The journey to Cheyenne took most of the day, with stops to feed and change Emma and to rest the horse. At the train station, Isaac purchased a ticket for Penelope and saw them settled in a compartment. As the whistle blew, signaling the train's imminent departure, he stood awkwardly in the doorway. "You'll come back?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the hiss of steam. Penelope looked up at him. This man who had saved her life and offered sanctuary when she needed it most. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "There may be complications, legal matters." Isaac nodded, understanding. "If you need anything at all, send word. I'll come." The simple promise brought tears to Penelope's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Isaac touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that was both farewell and promise, then stepped back as the train began to move. Penelope watched him through the window until the platform was no longer visible, wondering if she would ever see him again. The ranch house was just as Penelope remembered it, though it had been less than 2 months since she'd been forced to leave. William Thornton, Walter's older brother, met her at the door with a grim expression. "Didn't think you'd come," he said by way of greeting, his eyes moving to Emma with thinly veiled suspicion. Given the circumstances. I came for Emma's sake, Penelope replied, refusing to be intimidated. And to settle any legal matters regarding Walter's estate. William's expression soured further. That's why I sent for you. The lawyer says Walters will leave everything to his lawful wife and child. Seems my brother had more faith in you than I do. The funeral the next day was sparsely attended a few neighboring ranchers, some men from town who had done business with Walter, and a handful of women who seemed more interested in gossiping about the widow than in paying respects to the deceased. Penelope stood at the graveside, Emma in her arms, and felt nothing. No grief, no regret, not even anger. Walter had become a stranger to her long before he put her out, perhaps even before they were married. The meeting with the lawyer afterward was brief and surprisingly straightforward. Walter had died intestate without a will, which meant that under Wyoming territory law, his property would be divided between his widow and any legitimate children. Since Emma was his only child, she would inherit half the ranch upon reaching majority, with Penelope as her guardian managing the property until then. William was furious. That child ain't Walter's, he insisted, glaring at Penelope across the lawyer's desk. Anyone with eyes can see it. Mr. Thornton, the lawyer replied patiently. Under the law, any child born during a legal marriage is presumed to be the husband's offspring, unless you have evidence to the contrary that would stand up in court. Miss Emma is Walter's heir. William had no such evidence, of course. Walter's accusations had been based on nothing more than drunken paranoia and his own guilty conscience, a fact Penelope had suspected but never confirmed until she returned to find several of the ranch hands avoiding her eyes and a young widow in town suddenly flush with cash that could only have come from Walter. After the lawyer's meeting, Penelope returned to the ranch house to collect her belongings. She found her trunks in the attic, untouched since the day Walter had thrown her out. As she sorted through her clothes and personal items, deciding what to take and what to leave behind, she came across her wedding portrait, a formal photograph taken the day she had become Mrs. Walter Thornton. The young woman in the picture stared back at her with hopeful eyes, unaware of the heartache that lay ahead. Penelope studied her own face, trying to recapture the feelings of that day. Had she loved Walter? Or had she simply been grateful for the security he offered, the chance to not be alone? She set the portrait aside, neither packing nor discarding it. Then she reached for the gold band on her left hand and slowly, deliberately, removed it. She placed it on top of the wedding portrait, a silent acknowledgement that this chapter of her life was truly over. The question now was what came next. William made it clear that he expected her to sell her share of the ranch to him. You can't run this place, he scoffed. Not alone, not with a baby. Be sensible, Penelope. Take the money and go back to Ohio. But Penelope had no intention of being sensible, not in the way William meant. She had spent too long allowing others to determine her fate. First her father, then her mother's death, then Walter. Now, for the first time, she had choices. She could return to Ohio to the sister who had offered shelter. She could stay and try to run the ranch, though William was right about the challenges that would present. Or she could go back to Medicine Bow, to the small cabin where she had found unexpected peace. Back to Isaac. The thought of him, his quiet strength, his kindness to Emma, the way his rare smile transformed his face made her decision easier than she had expected. A week after the funeral, Penelope boarded the westbound train to Cheyenne. Emma, now nearly 5 months old, sat contentedly in her lap, fascinated by the passing scenery and the rhythmic clack of the wheels on the track. From Cheyenne, Penelope hired a wagon to take them to Medicine Bow, a journey that took the better part of a day. The driver, a taciturn man who asked few questions, deposited them outside the town's small hotel as dusk was falling. I can take you out to Montgomery's place in the morning, he offered, helping her down from the wagon. It's too late to start out there now. Penelope thanked him and arranged for the morning ride, then checked into the hotel. After settling Emma for the night, she sat by the window, looking out at the main street of Medicine Bow. In the morning, she would see Isaac again, assuming he was still willing to see her. The doubt crept in as she tried to sleep. What if he had changed his mind? What if he had only offered shelter out of pity, and now regretted asking her to return? What if he had moved on, deciding that a widow with a child was too much complication in his life? Morning came with no answers, only the certainty that she would know soon enough. After breakfast, Penelope settled their bill and met the wagon driver outside. The journey to Isaac's ranch seemed both longer and shorter than she remembered, longer in anticipation. Shorter in that the landmarks became familiar more quickly than she expected. And then the cabin was before them, looking exactly as it had when she left. Smoke rose from the chimney, a promising sign that Isaac was home rather than out with his cattle. Penelope paid the driver and gathered Emma in her arms, suddenly nervous. What would she say? How would she explain her return? Before she could decide, the cabin door opened and Isaac stepped out, clearly drawn by the sound of the departing wagon. He stood frozen on the porch, staring at Penelope and Emma as though he couldn't quite believe his eyes. "You came back," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. Penelope nodded, taking a step toward him. "We came back," she confirmed, glancing down at Emma. "If the offer still stands." Isaac crossed the distance between them in long strides, stopping just short of where Penelope stood. Up close, she could see the evidence of sleepless nights in the shadows under his eyes, the tension in his shoulders that spoke of worry. "The offer still stands," he said quietly. "But I need to know, is this temporary? Are you just passing through on your way somewhere else?" Penelope looked up at him, at this man who had saved her once and was offering to do so again. But this time the rescue felt different. This time she was choosing her path rather than having it forced upon her. "No," she said firmly. "We're not passing through. If you'll have us, we'd like to stay." The smile that broke across Isaac's face was like sunrise after the longest night. He reached out, tentatively at first, and touched Emma's cheek. The baby gurgled happily, recognizing him despite the weeks apart. "I missed you," Isaac said simply. "Both of you. The cabin's been too quiet." Penelope felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. "We missed you too. More than I expected." Isaac nodded, seeming to understand all she wasn't saying. He reached for her bags. "Come inside. It's cold out here, and Emma shouldn't be in the wind." The cabin welcomed them back, the fire crackling in the hearth, the familiar scent of coffee and wood smoke, the curtains Penelope had made still hanging in the window. Isaac had kept everything just as she'd left it, as though waiting for her return. Over coffee, Penelope told him about Walter's death, the funeral, and the unexpected inheritance. "The ranch is half mine now, half Emma's," she explained. "William wants to buy us out, but I haven't decided yet." Isaac listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful. When she finished, he asked, "What do you want to do?" The question was so simple, yet no one else had bothered to ask it. Not William, not the lawyer, not even Patricia in her letters. They had all assumed they knew what was best for Penelope. "I want." She hesitated, suddenly unsure how to express the feelings that had been growing in her since that first night in Isaac's cabin. "I want Emma to grow up somewhere safe. Somewhere she's loved and valued." She took a deep breath. "I want to see if what I feel for you, what I think you might feel for me, could become something more, given time." Isaac's eyes never left her face. "And the ranch?" "Your inheritance." "Money is useful," Penelope admitted. "It would give Emma security and me independence. But it's not worth staying somewhere we're not welcome, with people who doubt her very existence. She set down her coffee cup. I'd rather sell to William and use the money to build something new. Something better. With me? Isaac asked softly. Penelope nodded. If you'll have us. Isaac reached across the table, taking her hand in his. His fingers were rough from work, warm and strong around hers. I'd be honored, he said simply. But I want you to be sure. You've been through a lot these past months. I don't want to be something you settle for because you feel you have no other options. The concern in his voice, the care he took with her feelings, confirmed what Penelope already knew, that this man was nothing like Walter. That with Isaac she would be a partner, not a possession. I'm sure, she said firmly. I've had offers of help from my sister, from neighbors back east. I could go anywhere, do anything with Walter's money. She squeezed his hand. I choose to be here, with you. The smile that spread across Isaac's face was worth every hardship she had endured to reach this moment. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Then welcome home, Penelope. You and Emma both. The following weeks were a flurry of activity. Penelope wrote to William, accepting his offer to buy her share of the ranch. She wrote to Patricia, explaining her decision to stay in Wyoming. And she wrote to the lawyer, arranging for Emma's inheritance to be placed in trust until her daughter came of age. With the proceeds from the sale of the ranch, Penelope was able to contribute to Isaac's operation. They bought additional cattle, improved the fencing, and most importantly, began construction on a proper house to replace the small cabin. Isaac insisted that Penelope design it herself, wanting her to have a home that suited her needs and preferences. 3 bedrooms, she decided, sketching the layout on paper. 1 for us, 1 for Emma, and 1 for visitors or perhaps for more children someday. Isaac's eyes lit up at the mention of more children, though he said nothing. They had agreed to take things slowly, to build their relationship on friendship and mutual respect before considering marriage. But the tenderness between them grew daily, as did their understanding of each other. Spring came to Wyoming with a burst of wildflowers and newborn calves. The new house was completed just as the last snow melted, a sturdy 2-story structure of logs and stone that would withstand the harshest winter. Isaac insisted on carrying Penelope and Emma across the threshold the first time they entered, a gesture that brought tears to Penelope's eyes. It's perfect, she whispered, looking around at the spacious kitchen, the large windows that let in the light, the stone fireplace that dominated the main room. It's everything I dreamed of. Not quite everything, Isaac replied. He set Emma down in the cradle they had brought from the cabin, then turned to face Penelope. From his pocket, he withdrew a small wooden box. There's one more thing that would make it perfect, at least for me. Penelope's heart began to race as Isaac opened the box to reveal a simple gold ring set with a single pearl. It was my mother's, he explained. I've been saving it for the right woman, the only woman I've wanted to share my life with since Sarah died. He took Penelope's hand, his eyes never leaving hers. I know we agreed to take things slowly, and I'll wait as long as you need. But I want you to know that I love you, Penelope. You and Emma both. And whenever you're ready, I'd be honored to make you my wife. Penelope looked at the ring, then at Isaac's face, earnest, hopeful, filled with a love she had never seen in Walter's eyes. She thought of the night he had found her on the trail, how he had taken in a stranger and her child without question or expectation, how he had protected them, respected them, given them space to heal. I'm ready now, she said softly. I love you, Isaac. I have for longer than I was willing to admit to myself. The kiss they shared was gentle at first, then deepening with the promise of all the years to come. When they finally pulled apart, Isaac slipped the ring onto Penelope's finger, a perfect fit, as though it had been made for her. Mrs. Montgomery, he murmured, testing the sound of it. Penelope smiled up at him. Not yet, but soon. They were married in June, in a small ceremony at the church in Medicine Bow. Emma, now 8 months old and beginning to crawl, wore a dress Penelope had made from the same fabric as her own wedding gown. Patricia came from Ohio for the occasion, bringing with her the family Bible and a quilt that had belonged to their mother. "He's a good man," Patricia observed, watching as Isaac showed Emma a butterfly in the garden after the ceremony. "You can see it in the way he looks at both of you." "He is," Penelope agreed, "the best man I've ever known." As summer turned to fall and fall to winter, the new house became truly a home. Isaac formally adopted Emma, ensuring that she would always bear his name and inherit his property alongside any siblings who might come along. Penelope sold her wedding ring from Walter, using the money to buy books for the shelves Isaac built in the main room. Their first Christmas as a family was a joyous occasion, with Emma taking her first tentative steps toward the small tree Isaac had cut from their property. Penelope, her hand resting on her still flat stomach, exchanged a secret smile with her husband. By next Christmas, God willing, there would be another Montgomery to celebrate with them. As they sat by the fire that night, Emma sleeping contentedly in her father's arms, Penelope thought back to the snowy evening when Walter had thrown her out. At the time, it had seemed like the end of everything: her marriage, her security, perhaps even her life and Emma's. Instead, it had been a beginning. A door closing, yes, but another opening to a life far richer than she could have imagined. "What are you thinking about?" Isaac asked softly, noticing her pensive expression. Penelope smiled, reaching over to touch his face. "I was thinking about the night we met. How desperate I was, how certain that Emma and I would freeze to death on that trail." Isaac caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I thank God every day that I found you," he said simply. "You and Emma are the best things that ever happened to me." "And you're the best thing that ever happened to us," Penelope replied. "My cowboy who brought us in without a word." Isaac's smile was tender as he leaned over to kiss her, careful not to disturb the sleeping child in his arms. "Not without a word," he corrected gently. "Just without the right ones. I should have told you then what I know for certain now." "What's that?" Penelope asked, though she already knew the answer. "That I was meant to find you that night. That you and Emma were always meant to be mine." Isaac's voice was rough with emotion. "That I will love you both until the day I die, and beyond if God allows it." Penelope leaned into his embrace, surrounded by the warmth of the fire and the deeper warmth of belonging. Outside, snow began to fall again, blanketing their ranch in pristine white. But inside, all was light and love and the promise of tomorrow. "I love you, Isaac Montgomery," she whispered. "Thank you for bringing us home."